Hi, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to this panel discussion today. We'll be discussing a challenge that enterprise security teams face, the gap between identifying application security vulnerabilities and effectively resolving them. I'm Prasad Raman, VP of Partnerships at SciCode, and I'm excited to be your host for today's discussion. For those of you in the audience who are new to SciCode and our webinar series, welcome. We host a monthly series where we tackle the big questions that are top of mind for the application security industry. And for those of you who are joining us again, welcome back. As a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, please submit Q&A through the question box, and we'd love to get to your thoughts along the way. I'm joined by two experts today to help us get to answers and actionable guidance on this topic. I want to welcome Matthias Madou, the CTO and co-founder of Secure Code Warrior, as well as Jimmy Zhu, the field CTO at SciCode. Let's start with a quick intro. Could you briefly share a bit about yourselves? Matthias, I'll start with you, and then we can go over to Jimmy.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for checking out this webcast. My name is Matthias Madou. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Secure Code Warrior. I'm a techie. I'm a techie by background. I used to work on static analysis solutions back in the day. I have a PhD in application security, and I was working with static analysis solutions. So way back in the day, I worked on improving static analysis solutions. But the philosophy that I had was like, well, there's more than static analysis. We also need to make sure that developers can essentially write secure code from the start. Or if those solutions point out problems, we should make sure that a developer knows what to do and knows how to fix those problems. And that was the philosophy, that was the mindset to create Secure Code Warrior. We want to be there for the developers. We want to help the developers in creating secure code. So yes, we're Secure Code Warrior, 10 years in business, and I'm representing them today.
And Jimmy, over to you.
Thank you, Prasad. Happy to be here, right? As Prasad said, I'm a field CTO at SciCode, but 20 plus years in the industry, and I've done development work, done ops work, done security work, public-private sector practitioner. I've done AppSec for a long time. I built various AppSec programs, engineering tools, and all the tools out there. Led many DevSecOps transformations. Fun fact, actually, when I was on the consulting side, worked very closely with Secure Code Warriors, where we're talking about running tournaments for developers, developer training programs, security champions programs. So just so excited to just be on stage with Secure Code Warrior talking about this topic today.
Great.
Awesome. So to kick things off, in both of your experiences, what are the biggest challenges enterprises face today in bridging the gap between vulnerability identification and vulnerability remediation? Maybe Jimmy, let's throw it over to you.
I have a very simple answer. Tens and thousands of developers that I worked with in the past, right? They just say one thing: tell me what I need to work on and how to fix it.
So it's a prioritization problem, right?
First part, prioritization of or figure out what's real. The second part is how do I do it, right? It's two parts, and marry those two at the right time is usually right, kind of the golden problems, golden path to fix.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the first part is definitely on prioritization, trying to figure out what is the most important problem here. And the second is of course the fact that developers should know what to do next. What is their skill set? What do they know, and where can they get help? And that's the second problem, the second part of this problem.
So I mean that challenge is getting harder today. So in the AI-enabled software world, there's more productive developers, there's more code that's being generated, there are more vulnerabilities. In this new world, what are some things that you've seen that organizations do to help developers understand the risk and, as Jimmy, you talked about, prioritize that risk in this new era we're living in?
So
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
go for it, go for it. No, do it, do it.
First of all, I actually was just did a presentation at one of the OWASP chapters last week. talking about AI, and then we see quite a bit. I think just this month talking about there's new AI supply chain attacks, right? Targeting the configuration files of AI code generator like Copilot. So AI not necessarily making developers' life easier or reduce risk. It's increasing risk. But like anything else, right? The challenge is that when you look at modern stack, modern software development, AI is not just AI, right? And AI imply a lot of things. Working on new uh, way, new architecture, right? Building language models. Usually, AI also means that you building stuff cloud native, using native cloud services, which the cloud providers are providing these advanced, services around building AI. It's again, it's that full stack, right? We expect developers not only to know how to write secure code, but infrastructure experts, data experts, right, and experts everything, right? And that's probably it only gets harder.
Sure. If I zoom in on the developer as such, we see two movements. There's the startups, developers in startup organizations, and they can just go super fast with AI. Without being very technically, even without being very technically knowledgeable, they can go very fast, which is dangerous in itself. But they can just limitlessly go. If it doesn't work, they just restart from scratch and they can try to make a new app and just go. It's very different than an enterprise organization. They have established software, they have established customers. So everything that they do with AI needs to be validated by a human. It still needs to be checked, a pull request, essentially. It's almost like a pull request where the AI is suggesting something, and you still need to go through the logic like, hey, does that make sense? Is this secure? And so on and so forth. So we do not see the big numbers. It's not that developers are going 5 times faster because they still need to review and understand all of the code. But it's important. I think it's very important for software developers to still have that piece of critical thinking, because it's all too easy to just accept, like if you ask an AI solution, can you do XYZ with my code, and it does it, and it says, hey, does it look good? It's very easy to say, oh yeah, if you've said so, I think it's good. So critical thinking is still very important for software developers. We all too often just believe the system. And by the way, one thing that I always tell people to do is just ask ChatGPT a question about a field that you master, and you will immediately see like, you know what, it's not entirely correct, but I can fix it up to make it correct. And then ask ChatGPT a question about the field that you do not master, and guess what? You're just going to believe the answer and say, oh, that's the answer. That's it. That's what I was looking for. Interesting enough, when do we ask ChatGPT questions? Well, when we do not know the answer, right? That's exactly why we ask ChatGPT the question. So for us, it's very important that developers still have critical thinking. We still want to make sure they know the dangers, but also the advantages of using AI. So in general, the rules of the game have changed. It's no longer a developer as such that is developing code. It is a developer plus AI that is writing code these days. So that's how I think about software development and AI.
Just want to add, Matthias, because I
Yeah,
think
do it.
audience probably thinking about this, right? I mean, literally, it's this week and last week, last 2 weeks. There's a spike in discussion around vibe coding, right? Is
Yeah.
scenario you're talking about? There's a debate: is vibe coding good, vibe coding bad? I think I want to tie it back to the point that yeah, vibe coding might be okay if you still have critical thinking.
Yeah, so yes, I think vibe coding is okay if you have critical thinking, and also I'm always worried when people do not understand what they're doing. So they need to do more research and more critical thinking on the code that is presented to them to see if it makes sense. But at the same time, let's be honest. If you do not know about a certain area, if you do not know about security, if you do not know about certain problems that can be in the code, you will not look for it. So it's more than critical thinking. It's critical thinking and skill that we still need to
Yes.
create code.
Yeah. And maybe Matthias, let's kind of dig in on a point you mentioned before about the difference between small organizations and enterprise organizations. Can you talk a little bit about how enterprises think about that risk management problem, and what are some of the consequences you see um, within your customers of ignoring developer risk management? That might be something that could be an interesting thing to dig in on a little bit.
Yeah. So I feel for the last 2 decades, we're very much focused on controlling the risk in the bits and the bytes. And that's okay. We need to do that. We do scanning. We want to make sure that the bits and the bytes are okay. But we've never asked the question, but who's creating those bits and bytes? Like who's behind the keyboard essentially making the pieces of software? Because ultimately the risk in software is a byproduct. It's a byproduct of some thinking that an engineer did that is creating the code, and the engineer is essentially transferring risk into the code, and it is expressed in bits and bytes. So in the field of static analysis solutions and ASPMs and all of that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to control risk in the bits and the bytes, which is a fantastic thing to do. But you also need to think about the developers. Like, well, how often do they transfer risk? And are certain developers more risky than other developers, like because they are not skilled or they are skilled? And I think that's a really good philosophy to make sure that if you want to control risk of how you build software, you need to look at all those components. You need to look at the bits and the bytes. You need to look at the developer population. You also need to look at AI these days. Like, hey, what type of solutions are we using? Will they introduce more risk into our code base? To give a simple example, my philosophy is a AI in the hands of a good developer is going to be well used, because a skilled developer will know what bits and pieces they need to take and will build an application. AI in the hands of an unskilled developer, it's just dangerous. They're just going to copy paste stuff over, and without thinking, they're going to believe the system and just they're going to create vulnerabilities at rapid speed. Yes, they're going to go 10 times faster in creating code, but they're also going to go 10 times faster in creating problems in code. So the way we think about risk management is trying to figure out all the risks in the development process and try to get that onto a map and try to figure out, like, hey, how can we do better? Like, where is our biggest area of risk, and how can we improve that area? How can we do better in that area? So that's how we think about risk management in terms of software development.
And how do you measure that, Matthias? When you think about, you know,
Yep.
risky developers pushing insecure code, how are you identifying who they are, measuring the progress and the impact they have on the
Yeah.
business?
So there's a couple of ways, and there's definitely ways in the software that's Cycode can help with. For example, there's definitely ways in the software how we can measure risk. But our philosophy is with Secure Code Warrior, if you're asking very specific about Secure Code Warrior, is we figured out what a holistic secure developer looks like. We're 10 years in business. We sit on a mountain of data, and a group of data scientists essentially try to figure out what does a holistic secure developer looks like, and we try to characterize that. And the most simplistic way you can think about that is if you start with if you start in a new field and you do some training, well, in the beginning you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's going to take a long time. But the more you learn, the more you absorb information, the faster you're going to go, the more accurate you're going to be, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're trying to do in the Secure Code Warrior platform as well. We try to figure out in an organization, is a particular team of developers doing well? How good, how skilled are they? So essentially, we can measure how skilled they are, and that's how we can also try to control risk. To give a very simple example, I hope that a CISO only wants secure developers working on the most critical applications in their organization. I think that's what they aspire to do. But today, there's no way how you can measure that. How do you do that? Like, how do you know who's on that code base, and are they essentially skilled? So that's what we're trying to do with Secure Code Warrior. If you have your most secure application, we can essentially make sure that only very skilled developers can check in code into that repository. And that's a way for us to mitigate risk in an organization. And together with Cycode, for example, I think it's a very nice balance where we can tell you everything about the risk in your developer population. And Cycode can tell you everything about the risk in the bits and the bytes, what the byproduct of that software development.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, piggybacking on that, and maybe Jimmy, this is a good question for you, is as we see developers push more code, alert fatigue becomes a major concern. Um, you know, can you talk a little bit about how context and prioritization or the lack thereof exacerbates this problem? And comment a little bit about how, developer skills can address or lower overall alert volume or help mitigate this challenge for enterprises.
Yeah, so great question, right? I mean, I like what the Mattia just said about measuring risk, from a developer point of view. I think the velocity, right, based on how we ship software nowadays, definitely has exposed or quite multiplied the problem a little bit more. But before we get into prioritization, I mean, I like the originator, right? Like why? Well, because if you have more code or developer pushing code more frequently, so if there's a mistake, right, a mistake going to be multiplied a lot more. So if let's say developers are not very good at certain CWEs or writing certain type of things, that's going to be a lot, right? Now, prioritization, and because of the different layers, right? Again, remember, we're not just talking about source code anymore, right? There's different layers of the everything is the entire IT stack turned to code. So that means naturally you need to have a lot more tools, right? And nowadays people buy more tools that check different things, or one tool that does many functions doesn't matter in this case. It's just that a lot of those noise come from different tools looking at different things, or same different tool looking at the same thing. Because guess what? Um, eh, it's a good thing that I think the application security has gained a lot of the momentum. So all the DevOps platforms and every other vendor that has this feature say, oh, I do this. But so I think from a developer point of view, right, you have all these things coming in, all these findings from the vendors. Each vendor may have different ways of saying measuring risk severity. It might only have portion of that. So, my response to the first question, right? So, it's the overwhelming, it's the ability to deal with the volume of that, sort through, right? If you lack of skill in, the reason why there's originally an origination of any tool that picks something up is because probably there's knowledge gap somewhere. And now, not only there's knowledge gap, you expect as a developer to look through all these things and just manage to figure out what's wrong with it, and to fix it, right? So that's the problem, which is this is where the prioritization. But when I say prioritization, it's really prioritization plus, we call it the new concept, root cause analysis, figure out, or attack path analysis. All that together is not just prioritize on 10 out of the 100. It's important, okay, but teach a developer how it was introduced, in what means, and hopefully give enough context around how do you fix it. So that's where the value of prioritization, I call it holistic prioritization, is not only figure out what matters, but also how it was introduced, how to fix it. That's kind of really going to reduce the load and stress of developers, right? And especially those ones that needs help. Um, that's where the value comes in.
I love that. And if I can pick up on that, Jimmy. So alert fatigue, it's an interesting concept. And especially the way I think about it is the more we can get the developers on board, the better they will be able to sift through and essentially help the security team. Sure, we only want, in an ideal world, we only want the real issues to be on the plate of a developer. You know, that that's what we want ultimately. But the truth is, there's not enough software security people right now. There's not enough application security people that can sift through the noise, and some tools can do really good stuff and make sure that there's some good issues that come onto the plate of a software developer. But there's going to be false positives in any scenario. The way you slice and dice it, there's always, we can do the best we can, but there's still going to be issues that land the plate of a developer and they're like, oh, this should not come to me. I feel that we need to make sure that we engage with the developers and they have something to say as well. And a very interesting approach I've seen in one of our customers is they engage with the developer and they give the developer more power in their organization. So their philosophy is, if you're a skilled developer, you can essentially say that something is a false positive and the security team is going to believe you. And that's how you essentially also help us. But the first step is show us that you are skilled. And there are different ways that they do that, but they tell them you have more power. You can essentially decide for yourself if something is a false positive or not. And we will believe you, because ultimately, if we get you guys on board, you are going to help the overall security posture of an organization. And instead of having 1 or 2 application security people per 100, if you engage with 100 people, they are going to become your security team. They are become an extension of your application security team. So I like, alert fatigue, I think it's something that we need to tackle holistically, not just AppSec, not just developers, not just with a tool. It's a holistic approach in my view.
That's a perfect segue, Matthias. Actually, we had a very good audience question just come in. So thank you, Larry, for submitting that. We've talked a lot so far about the bits and bytes and the technology. We've talked a lot about the people and the skills. I think there's the part that's missing that you just touched on, Matthias, is about the process in an organization. And I think when you work with customers, or Jimmy in your former life as a practitioner, when you think about the organizational aspects and how do you motivate action, what are some of the organizational structures or policies that that are positive examples and negative examples? What are things that empower action to improve security? What are some things that get in the way?
I'm happy to take that one and kick it off and see where we land. So there's a couple ways to slice and dice your question, to be honest. There's top-down approach and there's bottom-up approach. So I've seen different scenarios in different organizations, and they all have their benefits, and they, each of them also has its drawbacks. So one thing, if it's top-down, it has to happen. It just has to happen. And we see that a lot in regulated industries. For example, in the financial industry, there are compliance drivers. Financial industry, they're not super innovative. They just want to make sure they have a compliant business. They move forward, don't get me wrong, but they also want to have a compliant business. So in those type of scenarios, it just is a top-down driven initiative, and it has to happen. So the good thing is, it happens. That's a really good thing. It has to happen. So as an organization, it has to happen, and we're building out a secure program, and we're making sure that we're in line with compliancy, but we also build secure software. You can see the negative. Quite often engineers are not involved, people are not involved. It has to happen. So it's a mandate on top of what they're already doing. It's one scenario. There's also the bottom-up scenario where, technology companies, for example, they thrive on innovation. They do not really thrive on regulation. Sure, they need to be, they need to adhere to certain standards, but quite often they thrive on innovation and they just have to go fast. And quite often in those type of organizations, it's more a bottom-up approach. It's more a bottom-up approach where, the people just want to build secure software because they see and they know that if they do not build secure software, at the tail end, they will have a lot of rework if they are not building secure software. So over there, we need to make sure we have everybody on the same page because, let's be honest, quite often a software developer just wants to crank out software, new functionality, and the security, some people, think about it, but not all of them, to be honest. So over there, we need to build out more of the initiatives, more, not the stick, but this is more of the carrot. Like, for example, the example I've just mentioned, you make them part of the team and they can say what's a false positive and what's not a false positive. So you give them more power. Another carrot is you can build that into a reward system. We've seen companies where they have a reward system and they say, hey, you know what? If you're making a conscious effort to build secure software, and we measure that in a certain way, then you can get some points into the company system. And with that company system, you can buy PTO days or swag or whatever. So there are various ways to build that. An HR, maybe a last example is an HR system. Um, if you want to move up in the ranks, well, how can we build a secure culture if our top leaders do have no clue about software security? So if you move up the ranks, show that you master building secure software. And if you have that skill and if you master that skill, then you can up level yourself in the organization. And as a natural effect, managers in that organization have software security chops, which is great because they can relate to software developers what they need to do and why they need to build secure software. So that's a long explanation to say, hey, there's a lot of different ways. There's a top-down approach. There's a bottom-up approach. There's pros and cons in both ways. My philosophy, I think you need a little bit of both, to be honest. You need a little bit of both where some stuff needs to be mandated, but it cannot be everything. It cannot be like a gigantic program which slows down essentially the entire organization. But I'm a big fan of mandating a couple things, making sure that we have the critical areas covered. But I'm also a big fan of a bottom up approach where you engage with the entire organization and make sure people rally behind it. So that's my philosophy on how I look at engaging and building a secure culture in an organization.
Jimmy, any
Yeah, I just
thoughts
want.
on that? Yeah.
I mean, that's great. Well put. Just a couple of things that reminded me again during my practitioner days. Just we talk about security development training. Obviously, I know secure core is part of that, right? But I think I do want to double click on the thing you said. Training is only part of the question, right? Enablement. How to build that culture? It does empowerment, right? And I think we Melodies talk about, but I can tell you in practice, I think a lot of our security folks in organizations, sometimes there's a it's a paradigm shift too, right? I don't think they used to give up control, but hey, if the dev teams or the security champions, this is not a deep dive security champions program, but if you have successful, trust them that do the right thing, right? And you said it, if they meet whatever the requirement is that they've demonstrated, give them the power to alter a finding is false positive, not false positive, fix it, right? So don't be the gatekeeper. So that's one way to build trust. So like underlying messages, building trust is so important. The other thing is, let's just forget about, I mean, think top down, bottom up. I think from a culture perspective, which is dear heart to me, we need to stop thinking that security is just another layer of something special, right? Um, there's a pride in software engineering, right? We want to build quality software, which should really be helping educating the fact that, security findings is just another quality thing that we want developers to build quality software. Security is just another lens, right? If we can do that, then we're going to get right feedback loops over time. The developers hopefully are not going to see security just whole special thing, another thing they're going to deal with, or that the security team will just say, hey, sure, well, we'll give you, tools you need, but at the end, you don't really have the help to say so. But I think that's important, right, to winning the hearts and minds of developers.
Yeah, security is just part of quality, right? So security is just a piece of quality, and developers that want to do the right thing, developers that want to build great software, they think about all parts of quality, including security.
So one thing I think you both have touched on indirectly is the perceived trade-off sometimes between security and developer velocity. And maybe Jimmy, it's a good question for you of um, is that a real trade-off, and then how do organizations mitigate that? And then how can we better communicate the value of a strong AppSec program to ensuring that we don't slow down the velocity that developers can work at?
Great question. I mean, this could be a very loaded answer, but just building off what I just said, right? If we can treat security as not as part of quality engineering, then I will make assumption. I know not everybody's probably there, right? If organizations is treating software engineering as an important trade, right? If you're building, whether you're building product or not building product, any kind of software, then I think that when you just like regular QA testing or any other testing for software without security, it's you got to go through that rigor process, right? So I think that um, introducing security as part of that process, obviously with the right modern process and tooling, right? We don't want the scan to run 2 days, right, anymore, not in today's environment. But with all that, mitigated, and I think it's important to say, hey, it's not necessarily slowing down anymore than that slow down when you go through quality checks. And I think that's the easiest way to say that, right? Obviously, I think that it's there's culture, but I think that there's a lot of innovation that's been happening in this space, right? To factor in the fact that, hey, look, we understand that technology and integrations and workflows and design architecture all does influence, right? And so I think make sure that we are using the right modern as much as possible. Depends on the complexity of the organization and obviously the app they're building and their current software delivery process. Any opportunity for optimization, maybe the fact that they used to integrate the process, if you can just improve that, then you're winning, right? So I think that's important to say that yeah, it's not always slow it down, but it's in comparison, yeah, it's just like quality checks, right? Or if there's any modernization happen, whether it's modernizing tools and processes, making it better. I think that's kind of way you can articulate the fact that, yeah, we're actually helping you speeding up.
So, Prasad, I'm going to respectfully disagree that there's a trade-off between security and speed. And here's the reason why. I think if you're in it for um, the short run, like if you're in it for the short run, I think I agree there's a trade-off between security and speed of development. But if you're in it for the long run, then I highly disagree, because it is actually proven that if you're creating more problems in code, there's a lot more rework, and the rework is way more expensive than doing it correct in the first place. And we've proven that. So we have customer case studies where we prove that people that put in the effort up front, they have a big ROI in the end because they have less rework. So people that are still in the mindset that there's a trade-off between fast coding and security, they're just wrong. They do not understand that game exactly, because there needs to be a reason why we want to build security in. And if security is a part of quality, maybe people can understand that part better. If you think about, well, it's a trade-off between quality and speed, and quality has a gigantic effect down the road, then people will understand this better, I hope. Because if you think about security, they only think about the naysayers and the negative stuff and the no kind of stuff. But this is not the case. If we're talking about application security, we're not talking about no and the naysayers. We're really talking about a piece of quality, a piece of improved quality that further down the line will get you a huge benefit if you did it correct.
Fully agree there. That's a great point. Um, I guess let's one more to you, Matthias. As we think about people who are on the front lines and they're developers, they're writing code. At the end of the day, they're the ones who are directly responsible for that. How does education act as that first line of defense to make sure that the individuals writing and building applications are trained and are able to be that organization's first line of protection?
Yeah, and so I think that ties directly back to my previous answer. It's exactly right for software developers. If they're in for the short run, they should care, And you quickly notice if people are in there for the short run, because they can create problems, and by the time you need to fix those problems, they're out. They moved on to their next gig, and they do not experience the pain of what it takes to go through a vulnerability, an exploit, whatever, call it out, and it's painful. It's very painful. So developers that are there in the long run, that take pride in their work, as Jimmy was saying, um, they understand this game. They understand this game that, hey, if we're doing the right thing, we will have a much easier job over time, and hopefully the people that we hire in the team will have a much easier job as well. If we just put a proof of concept without much thinking into production, us and the next group of people will have huge problems. So in my philosophy, the first line of defense is absolutely developers, because um, way back in the day we were building walls around our software because our software was broken. Well, maybe we should ask the question, why is our software broken? Why, what's going on here? So the first line of defense, the start left, not the shift left, but the start left is, it all starts with the software developer. It all starts with the code creation process, a person behind a keyboard creating the code. That's when it all starts. So, in my philosophy, the best investment you can make is making sure that that developer knows exactly what to do and how to create the code, so that ultimately further down the line, 2, 5, 10 years later, you do not have a problem with that piece of code.
Um, awesome. So, we've had a pretty rich discussion so far when we talk about bridging the gap between vulnerability identification and resolving them. We've talked about technology, developer education, organizational processes. I want to throw it over to Jimmy real fast and talk about SciCode in particular, and talk about how kind of the solution of the ASPM platform that SciCode delivers helps bridge that gap and some of the benefits it gives to enterprises.
Yeah, so just as Matthias Kokoria focused on developer, right? I mean, in a way, Cycle primarily focused on developer in sifting through noise, right? I mean, everything Cycle does is helping developer figure out, you know, what matters, right, to them, what the real risks are. So I would say that the couple things that really, from a developer perspective, that Cycle really is trying to solve or optimize is like, or actually it's for the security team as well, but usually for developers, first of all, like what can they even know what they have, right? Sometimes they don't even know what they have introduced in their technology, in their repositories. What artifacts can and where all the build workflows, all the commits, right? So over time, there's a technical debt that we can actually inventory expose. First, that's number one, right? Understand what they have, and two, right? Really, we obviously can surface risk very fast, accurate. One of the things that makes Cycle unique in the ASPN space, right, is the fact that we have very quality proprietary scanners that have low false positive rate that scan, and I'll call it the quality in quality out concept, right? Before we talk about prioritization, we want to make sure that the data feeds into its quality, so we controls that, right? So we can surface obviously from code to artifacts to container infrastructure, right? Even secrets NHIs. But we want to make sure that we bring in context from other tools, right? I remember one of the, as a practitioner, it's very difficult to correlate, runtime findings, DAS findings into, where they come from, who owns it, provide a telemetry to figure out that I mentioned earlier, the root cause analysis, the exposure path, because not only developer wants to know which issues are real, uh, which issues are actually high risk. They also want to make sure that is this theoretical or is it actually it's a real thing, right? And obviously the runtime tools usually are the ones that can validate is it real or are there any opportunity for exploitation from the internet. So we take that finding in to build that attack path, right, and to help developer. And last piece is that the root cause analysis, which is helps right with the context of okay, now that we know what it is, what the issues are, we know what we have, and we know how it was introduced, and we know the exploitation path, what attacker would do. We also focus on to call it the just in time, right? It's the context, because I think yeah, developer not going to have time once they, as they try to commit code or try to merge their what they just built that morning through a pull request. If they can see everything right then and figure out what the issues are and hopefully detailed steps, of how to fix it, then we'll get that to them right through automation, integrate to whatever workflow that's suitable to them through automation. Then they can fix it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jimmy. And Matthias, similar question over to you. Wide-ranging discussion today. Um, Secure Code Warrior is one of the leading providers in addressing some of these problems. Would love to know a little bit more about how the platform specifically addresses those challenges.
Absolutely, and it's so oh, very similar to what Jimmy was saying. So very similar to what Jimmy was saying. For us, organizations quite often do not even know how many developers they have and what they're coding on. So ultimately, our philosophy is like, hey, as a CISO, as a director of application security, you can control risk by making sure that security skilled people are checking in code into your repository. So we start with that philosophy because that's your ultimate goal. You want to make sure that only security skilled developers are checking in code into a repository. So with Secure Code Warrior, we can do that. We have plugins into GitHub and GitLab, and we can make sure that we figure out what the skill level is of a secure developer, and if that's good enough to check in code into that particular repository. So to do so, we figured out what a skilled developer looks like. So we have something called Trust Score, and it's based on 10 years of research. So we have a database of 10 years old, 350,000 active developers on our platform. And a couple of years ago, we asked a group of data scientists, like, hey, can you figure out what a skilled secure developer looks like? And they dug into the data. And the most simplistic way to think about it is, well, if you start learning, you make a lot of mistakes. You'll make a lot of mistakes, but over time, you're gonna, when you learn, you're gonna solve those things faster. Your accuracy is going to be higher, and you're gonna go through and pound through that particular exercise. So that is what we call a trust score. And a company has a trust score, a team has a trust score, and based on that trust score, people can check in code into a repository. Of course, quite often we see gaps. We see gaps in the knowledge. AI is, for example, a very interesting one where it's going so fast. We want to make sure people are upskilled and know the latest and greatest on how to use AI technology, on how to create secure code. Well, if we identify those areas, then we fall back onto our training platform. So we have an upskilling platform with plenty of content, language and framework specific, and we can make sure that the developers are upskilled in the areas that they're lacking right now so that they essentially are security skilled to produce high quality secure code. So this is how Secure Code Warrior can help you mitigating risk that is potentially introduced in your development process through your developers.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthias. Thanks, Jimmy. And just one comment before we move on to the final phase of the webinar. Both platforms fully integrated. We're able to kind of combine some of the prioritization and scanner and vulnerability identification benefits in SciCode, as well as have the developer-centric training focus of Secure Code Warrior. If you'd like to hear more, reach out to any of us after this call, and we're happy to walk you through how the two platforms complement each other. So to close it out before we go to questions, and just as a reminder, please submit any questions through the question box. We have a few that we'll get to towards the end. But we have multiple decades of AppSec experience on the webinar today, and I just wanted to ask both of you before we go, and maybe Jimmy, we'll start with you, is for our audience, what's one piece of actionable advice you'd give to security leaders if they want to better work with their development teams, improve their vulnerability resolution process? In the time you've been in AppSec, what are some good pieces of advice you have?
That's a long conversation, but if you pick with one, I think as much as we want to build a culture for developers, right? We need to build a culture in the security team, right? If this is just security, is that don't treat developer security, AppSec, whatever name it, anything that deal with developer introduce issues as do not treat it as just another layer of vuln management, right? I think that for security practitioners, I think build a lot of muscle memory from industry training and certifications that let's manage it, let's get all the findings, let's just get it over there, right? And yeah, I think we moved thankfully we moved from spreadsheets hopefully to Jira tickets. But if you're just automating a lot of noise, you think it'll solve a problem. It's not going to solve a problem, right? And don't try to use general SLAs as an example uh, tied to different findings, because the modern application and security application stack, right, with artifacts that you might not have control, maintained by upstream maintainers, right? In so my point is we need to reset the culture within the security team not to be gatekeepers, enabling power, right? It really focusing on use the right tool technology, but try to be the, be the trainers, coaches, right? I think that Matthias talked about the carrot and the whip. Let's be more carrot than whip. I get it. How do you regulate environments? You need to pass audits, but I think still a fine line between, okay, if they've proven the right things are happening, let's give them some reward, some power to be self-sufficient.
Awesome. And Matthias, over to you on the same question. Any pieces of actionable advice you give to security leaders?
Yeah, I was so in my philosophy, I'm going with measurement and benchmarking. So if for security leaders, um, I quite often challenge them, like, if you're investing in certain solutions, what is the ROI, and how do you benchmark certain things against, if you're doing an upskilling program, for example, um, is it going well? Do you know? How do you measure that? Is there an ROI? How do you compare against others? Because I feel personally in our application security space, we're not measuring enough, and we're not trying to figure out, is there an ROI? And again, in its most simplistic way, an AppSec person is kind of a lonely person trying to do that in its own organization. And yes, they talk to a couple of other AppSec people, but there's no such thing as a benchmark in general in application security. Quite, for example, is 7 vulnerabilities in the repository, is that good or bad? I don't know. Like, I don't know. It depends how you look at it. So there's very little benchmarking. The same is true in our space in developer risk management. We're trying really, really hard to get that benchmarking in, to get that measurement in, so that we can prove that what you're doing is meaningful, what you're doing is measurable, and it's improving your software security posture. So my philosophy for my question, my piece of advice for security leaders is dig into the details of why you're doing certain things, how you're measuring, how you're getting an ROI on certain systems, and try to get your head around that, because that's ultimately, maybe to finalize my comment, ultimately, what do you want to achieve in the application security business? And quite often people say, well, we want to find the vulnerabilities and we want to. Sure, but that is not the ultimate goal of an organization. The ultimate goal of an organization is to make your customers happy with the product that you're making. You want to ship reliable code, to ship a reliable application so that your customers are happy. And security should align with that bigger vision. Security should align with, like, okay, we want to make our customers happy. It's our philosophy is not to find as many problems as possible today and stop the entire process. No, no, that's not we want. That's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that we build secure systems in the fastest way possible. So how can we all align with that greater vision? And part of that exercise is definitely measuring and benchmarking against other solutions and other companies.
Excellent. Well, we have a couple of audience questions that have come in, and we have a few minutes left to address those. Um, One of them, and maybe Jimmy, I'll throw this over to you to start. So looking ahead, what emerging trends do you see shaping the landscape of AppSec? Um, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about AI because we talk about AI. So yes, just leave it out there. It's a trend, but I
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it. But I think um, one of the trends that I see is I think we came a long way from, I can talk about the tech space specifically, right? We compare it 10, 20 years ago to now. I mean, I think the focus on developer security is kind of baked in, right? It's messaging, it's all that, and if folks want to integrate with dev tools, I think that part is good. But I think one of the trends is that now, I mean, right now the ASPM wave is okay. There's a lot more attack surface, right? A lot more tools. Let's find something that normalizes the data, right, with time prioritization. But I think ultimately where it's going, right, we want to be is okay, great. We want to find more issues. Well, we don't want to find more issues, or at least find issue that matters. But we need to address the elephant in the room. We need to fix it, right? So I think how do we actually accelerate the fixing is where we are going, right? We should be going, right? Some of the tech is focusing on the actual fixing, right? Refactoring applications, like the actual upgrading a library or rewriting automatically proprietary code. Some could be just figure out the ownership, the root cause analysis, and have this local no-code automation that creates that, whether it's through automated pull requests, all that, right? Whether it's AI or not AI, it's about how do we help developers fix things faster, right? I think that's where it's going. One of the many aspects of
I'll pick up on that, Jimmy. I like the comment that it's definitely going. But by the way, I will not avoid AI. So I'm sorry, I will not avoid AI here in my answer. Um, but if we're looking at the fixers, there are a lot of AI fixers coming. It's not new technology. If you think about IntelliJ, they have that quick fix technology for the last 15 years. It only requires a human to set it up properly, and you can do auto fixing in IntelliJ as well. But nobody takes the time to do it, which is quite interesting in itself. So there's definitely the trend of AI fixers, and the bottom line is back to the beginning. AI fixing is great. I'm all for it, but in the hands of skilled developers, we're going to have a great outcome. It cannot, in the hands of unskilled developers, they're just going to say accept, 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 accept. And if AI solutions are perfect, fantastic. But we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. So, but it's pretty interesting. So the field of application security needs to do much better in times of AI as well, because we're producing code at rapid speed. Non-developers are producing code at rapid speed because they're vibe coding or whatever we're going to call it today. But so that's the reality. We need to do better in application security because we suddenly have a lot more people that call themselves developers and cranking out code. So, we need to keep up.
Awesome. Well, Jimmy, Matthias, thank you so much, and I think that's it for our session today. So we'll wrap here in the interest of time. I wanted to give a huge thanks to Matthias and Jimmy for diving deep on this topic. Their insights were really valuable to hear. If you'd like to connect to Matthias, Jimmy, or myself, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and we can continue the conversation there and answer any additional questions you might have. But wanted to thank everyone for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
it. Thank you.